Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for joining us for our webinar today. The topic at hand today is your predictive foundation to the shortest path to agentic AI. So we have two great presenters for you. The first is DataRobot's Chief Product Officer, Venki Veeraraghavan, and the second is Dell Technologies' Senior Director of AI Solutions, Brad Maltz. So without further ado, Venki, please go ahead.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for joining us. Wanted to sort of talk a little bit about sort of how to move from where you are. Almost every company in the industry has some form of predictive AI already built in, and you must be talking about how to get to agentic AI. And so we wanted to share some of the lessons that we've learned from working with a lot of customers and partners on how to make that journey. So let's go to the next slide. So, just to frame sort of the types of agents, we broadly see three types of agents today. The first one is sort of what we call productivity agents. This helps individuals become more productive. These are sort of broadly called sort of co-pilots, things like Microsoft Copilot, the work that Anthropic Cowork, etc. And so what these do is they help each individual get more productive, better PowerPoint decks, better analysis, better emails, etc. And this does help people get more productive, but it has the one thing of not being clear on how to drive the measurable ROI. So that's one of those sort of slightly harder things to do when you're just looking at individual productivity. The next one is what we call LOB agents, and these are sort of agents that are automating what you're already doing. And so this is often hosted inside the SaaS apps and business apps that you already use, whether it's Joule and SAP or something in Salesforce or Workday. And this is sort of like, helping you get those things, those work processes go faster. And so these are things like, how do I do expense reporting quicker? How do I do a customer service call or things like that? So existing processes that are going the workflows that are going faster. The third one is what we believe is where we focus on and sort of where we believe there's really deep measurable ROI. And what we mean by this is putting the agent at the core of your business workflow. And so to give an example from my industry, sort of software development, as the agents got better at encoding, we now assume default that the key coder is going to be the agent. Obviously, the agent by itself can't build everything. And so we surround the agent with other subject matter experts, such as, developers, architects, designers, PMs, etc., to actually help the agent build good code. So it's sort of what you want to do is as you get these big disruptions, you want to think about how to put that in the middle. And so what we're going to think about is how are we going to do this in your industry and in your business workflows to really reimagine what it means to actually get to a business outcome from using agents and then using the tools that you already have. So with that, let me go to the next slide. So this is sort of like what most people are doing today. Like if you look at before agents, we used AI/ML a lot, and often it was the model is doing a prediction, but often the prediction was part of a much bigger workflow that delivered a business outcome. And so people would read it, data scientists would interpret it, you'd go on a dashboard, execs would look at it, you'd have a discussion around it, and then you'd do some what ifs, and then you'd eventually make a decision, and then an action was taken. So all the stuff that was in the gray became sort of like human middleware and human decision making, right? So that's kind of like the broad opportunity that agents provide us to get a chance at going. But you'll notice that at the heart of it is obviously the hard data that's coming from your systems, the clean data that we already have invested in, and then the modeling that you've done. Those are all key inputs. They're necessary, but they're not sufficient. And that's sort of like what we'll sort of think about the transition from a pure predictive world to an agentic world that actually utilizes the investments you already done. So let's go to the next slide. So super simplified version of sort of what you might think about. But, when you're looking at sort of key business outcomes and you want to think about how to sort of transform them, how to agentify them, and how do you sort of think about that? What you want to think about the agents is that as a high-level orchestration and reasoning layer that really sort of pulls all the things you're already doing. So you're already doing predictions. We talked about that. You're doing a bunch of analysis, risk analysis, understanding, getting insights. Then you're doing optimization. Often you're trying to figure out, hey, look, if I'm doing a supply chain planning, I'm trying to optimize. Should I optimize for speed, should I optimize for profit, should I optimize for volume? Those all are different answers depending on what you have. And so you'll use predictions and your data and your analysis, but you really want to sort of think through what are the different kinds of optimizations you want to do so that you can get the desired business outcome. And then you want to take action based on that. And so the idea here is that the thing that agents are really good at, and I think we've learned this over time, is not necessarily proposing the answer directly. And that's kind of, a ChatGPT sort of got us used to the fact that it'll answer everything, but then it also answers things uh, confidently wrong, right? And so the idea is that what you really want to do, what they're really good at is actually understanding human intent. So when you think about the user at the top, talking to the agent about what they want and what are the things they're trying to do, the agent can actually break that down into smaller problems and then use real grounded, tools, whether it's real data, mathematical models, ML models, doing analysis and doing things like solving for optimization. But these are hard. So the gray layer down there is hard science. It's grounded, it's deterministic. But what your LLM is doing is really trying to understand how do I use these different tools? How do I synthesize the responses back? And then having a dialogue with the subject matter expert who basically owns the business outcome. And so that is sort of the role we see LLMs play very well because that's the core strength, as opposed to sort of knowing the world because they know the world at large in the internet, but they don't know your business. And your business is really coming through this bottoms up through these gray tools, for instance. So that's how you think about sort of looking at how do you go past predictive AI and really to think about like how you're going to optimize and deliver a business outcome with agents sort of using this as a foundation. Let's go to the next slide. So it's just sort of as a sort of summary, your agents, if you're just doing agents with LLMs, what you'll find is that, they're hard to control. They never quite get the context right. They don't quite understand what's happened before. And a lot of you are very familiar with these problems. So the real things that you want, the real way to solve that is actually to sort of have the LLM sort of really focus on the thing it does really well, which is like it understands lots of concepts, it is understanding reasoning, it understands how to call tools. And so the more you sort of build out these deterministic things that are your business logic or your data and your context, the more you can sort of provide that, the better the LLM is able to sort of iterate over them and then call new tools to compute new outcomes and then synthesize them for a business outcome owner to approve. Now, obviously, this is where we are today, but over time, you can imagine how these outcomes, once we get confidence in them, more of them, the actions can be taken autonomously, and only exceptions can be bumped up to a subject matter expert. So that is sort of things to happen in the future. But like for right now, I think a lot of them are going to be interactive, but dramatically changes the nature of how the business outcomes are done. So what I want to do is give a couple of examples. If you can go to the next slide, please. So here's an example of Chevron. It's a public reference. They sort of looked at human safety in their plants as a core business problem that they're trying to work on. They're thinking through about the facilities of the future, how do you put people from harm's way, and how do we sort of make sure that we are solving the problem correctly. And so here what they do is they have it's called midstream, sort of the refineries, and they're working through a lot of chemicals and gases and things like that. And inevitably there'll be some amount of, some leakage or some anomaly, as they call it, that comes in, and the systems can detect it. Normally what they do is they have a lot of drones and robots that actually view the plant and make sure that they have a clear view of what's going on. But when they have this anomaly, they have to sort of ground all of these robots because they're all electrical mechanical things that might ignite the gas, right? So often called the landman scenario. And so what they're trying to do is, and then when they do that, they have to send people in, in hazmat suits and et cetera, to like go into the thing. So they're trying to avoid that. And so what they did is they worked with us and NVIDIA to build a solution where they are pulling in the anomalous signals from their IoT sensors. They're looking at models that actually figure out how the gas will develop over time, given the local weather patterns, and then they use optimization engine to drive sort of the agent to sort of stay away from the gas plume. So pretty advanced scenario, and they're sort of thinking, building out how to deploy this in their refineries. But this kind of work is what we think of like sort of disruptive business outcomes that come from doing agents, where we're not they're using sort of scientific tools like Physics Nemo or Co-op to actually do a lot of the modeling, but they're putting it all together in an agentic interface and an agentic application, so that the operator can actually really very quickly sort of move through that and make scenarios. This is something that they could not have done before because they couldn't have done this at that speed. Sort of looking at where the gas is going, how do you task a drone? All of that was doing it at near real time, and that's the benefit of this. Another example, sort of closer to sort of many of our day-to-day lives, is a company that is really doing a supply chain processing. But as you know, there's a lot of supply chain shocks that are coming in nowadays. So what they were wondering is, how do I make sure that instead of doing a forecasting and a supply chain adjustments once a quarter when life was quiet and they could make long-term plans, but in this world of AI, and this happens to be a sort of a technology company, they are seeing a lot more disruption from in terms of new information that's coming in. Whether it's a data center, there is a new technology, new demands, etc. And so they want to do things much quicker. And so what they're using is an agent to actually look at how do you orchestrate across predictive models to understand the forecast of where things are going. How do I, when some change happens, what do I do? What if scenarios? Like what happens if I send my supply to a different customer, right? What is my profit margin? What is my, how long does it take to get there? And then they also do optimization where they say, look, I want to make my quarter. How do I make sure I get it for POs versus how do I make sure that I have most strategic customers that are happy? So those may not be the same a constraint that you want to solve for. So they want to solve for these multiple things. So here we have an agent that really is sort of helping a supply chain planner sort of really understand, and a sales ops person really understand how does a change affect their supply chain, and what should they do with the disruption. So another example of sort of understanding that and using a lot of agentic technology based on a foundation of your current data and your predictive investments already. So let's go to the next slide. So as I sort of get past the examples, I want to sort of tee up three concepts that we want to sort of deep dive in next. So as you're sort of going to an agentic world, there are three big concepts we want you to think about. One is you should be no surprise to sort of everything that we're talking about in the industry today. We went from token maxing to value maxing. So how do you think about costs, and what does it mean to think about open weight models versus frontier models? They all have a role to play. So that's one. Second is model strategy. There are infinite number of models at this point. There are models from every provider, all kinds, from different technologies, etc. So how do we start thinking about a model strategy? And finally, how do you pick the right use case that drives towards measurable ROI? So what do I do? Not every use case is the same, as I talked about earlier. So how do you sort of think about which use case to use? So to get us started, I'm going to invite Brad to speak about cost and model strategy. Brad, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you very much. So when we dig into the cost conversation, obviously the popular topic around this is tokenomics. And as we work with our customer base, we're hearing a whole bunch from the industry that there's a lot of decisions that people are contemplating right now in their tokenomics strategy. What we really want to break it down to is try to simplify the tokenomics conversation for people. So I'm going to bucketize it into kind of two larger categories. What do you want to run versus where do you want to run it? When you start talking about what do you need to run, this obviously ties back to the use case, but the reality is the token costs are impacted by your model strategy, which we're going to dig into a little bit more, by the actual quality of the agents, as well as how you're observing those agents and models. When you start talking about the build quality of the agents, this one's very important as the industry progresses forward. When you start thinking about agents getting built around skills, getting tools associated with them, and utilizing LLMs to kind of accomplish their tasks, when you actually build an early version of an agent, it has not usually been optimized. It usually hasn't been trained very well from a skills perspective yet, so it's still able to do a whole bunch of things outside of a set of guardrails. So one of the first things we usually describe to people is to build a quality agent, you really need to think about what are the guardrails around that agent. Everything from human in the loop to actually how you're going to hard code that agent to actually accomplish a task. Those two factors will help minimize the actual tokens on the back end that it potentially will go and utilize from a model perspective. You also want to dig into other aspects of making sure that that agent has access to quality data, as well as has the ability to utilize the right model behind the scenes for the right use case. And this is actually a major part of the model strategy. On top of all of this, when you're digging into that tokenomic side of agents and models, you need to be able to measure. And observability is key when you dig into this because you want to continuously evaluate the model usage versus the actual agents and the token count tied back between the two of them. Now, the where to run it is the other kind of XY axis that you'd actually be looking at in this equation because you have to decide, is it worth it to run these agents and models up in the hyperscaler kind of cloud environment? Is it worth it to host it locally more in your own data center or co-location facility? Or should we offload it more to a desk side or edge conversation? And all three of these kind of landing spots impact the actual calculation you're going to make from a tokenomics perspective. There's no one right answer. The answer that you are going to try to get towards is what is the business TCO and ROI that you have for the use case tied to the agent, tied to the model deployment, and how does that map down to your infrastructure hosting strategy under the covers? What we've actually found from the field conversations and our customers that we work with is that we actually have the ability with Dell AI Factory to actually optimize the spend when you actually do have more of an on-prem data center and or desk side approach to this, to the point that it could take only a few months to actually break even versus some of the hosted environments that a lot of people are working within right now. Let's go to the next slide. At the core of the tokenomics conversation is that model strategy. And whenever I'm talking to customers out there, they actually have a whole bunch of use cases that they're testing, usually on frontier models to start. It's very easy right now to get spun up on Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini or some of these other models. And the end of the day, it's a great place to start what you're doing. Of course, in those situations, when you're using more of the cloud hosted versions, this is where people have the stories where the token counts and the costs are getting out of control. Well, this is where, as a business, you need to figure out where do open weight models come in. Where does it matter to bring in more lower parameter open weights models, more for very simple tasks, where you actually don't need the agent or the user to have a very complex, intelligent model behind it. And the end of the day, when you start figuring out where you're running things, especially more in the desk side and edge world, a lot of those open weights models have been optimized for those situations and deployments within that edge type environment. Well, if you expose the business to more of a portfolio view of your model strategy, which is the goal at the end of the day, you then need to figure out how are you going to handle routing of those models. The agents are going to automatically call whatever they can on the back end from a model perspective. The goal here is for you to be able to put more routing layers in the middle of that model and agentic strategy so that you as a business can control the costs as well as the quality, data sensitivity, latency, all the other aspects of that routing environment. For when an agent makes a call, you have the ability to make sure it's routed based on your business criteria, which should then align to that model fit that you actually decided from a business perspective. There's a lot more to dig in on this strategy here for models, but this is a high level for how you have to start thinking about this when you're driving more of the top-down agentic strategy, as well as contemplating your tokenomics outcomes. I'm going to hand it back to Vinky now, and we're going to jump deeper into the use case conversation.
All right. Thank you, Brad. So I want to sort of give some examples of places where you're looking at a complex workflow. You're looking really at an outcome, right? And so the idea is that what you're looking for is a place where you have a business outcome that requires multiple teams, data silos, applications to get the job done. And so whether you're looking at sort of if you're trying to do a supply chain example, for instance, you're trying to say, hey, look, when I have something different that comes from a logistics application that says, look, something has gone wrong with my logistics. You get that information from supply chain. Your orders are in SAP. Your sales forecast is in Salesforce, And so you have to sort of think through how to pull them all together. So that's a good example of that. So the idea is that, there are lots of, KYC in financial services is a great one, but it's not just a single thing. It's multiple topics that you need to sort of work through. So, so then you think about areas where you're not looking at a single workflow, but you're looking at sort of how do you get an outcome where there are multiple workflows, often with teams that are in different teams or roles that have to get involved to do that. And I think just to ground it, if you think about what's happening in coding, which one of the places where agents are sort of most further along in sort of changing the way we work, what used to be a waterfall process of like, hey, here's the product manager who defines what the product should do. Here's a designer who shows how the product should look like, and then an engineer who builds it, and then a production person who runs it. What we're seeing increasingly is that the first three roles are becoming more merged and fuzzy. Because what's happening is that because the coding can be done so quickly, a designer can code a real prototype and even sort of run a small prototype. A developer can help the prototype go from there to production in terms of like what are the set of secondary issues that the designer may not understand, but they have to work through, which is like things like scaling and auth, etc. And a program manager can iterate on multiple concepts to understand what might actually meet the customer's needs. So suddenly, what you're having is the agent is in the center that's actually running your coding thing, but different sets of roles are now working with the agent to actually fine tune and do iteratively understand the problem with the user and then improve it. So that's kind of how we think about sort of one of the best ways to like put the agent in front. So take a business outcome, not a business process. Take a business outcome. Think about how to think of if an agent were to do it. Now it'll be you might even not believe it, but at least you have to start thinking through how should I do it. And then you think about what are the things that it needs to get grounded, right? What are the sets of data it needs? What are the set of tools and what are the sets of science and business process that it needs, and what are the actions? And then you start sort of adding in the people and the process to actually say, how do I rethink this process? So here's some examples of that. Let's go to the next slide. So, and as you go through this, I think there is we've seen like customers really go through a multi-stage process to get there. And the first thing is like sort of identify what is the outcome. We talked about this before in the previous slide. But then you have to think through like, hey, look, how do I make it grounded with the stuff that is really unique to my environment? Now, the supply chain for Walmart is very different than the supply chain for, let's say, NVIDIA. Right. And so you can't just say, hey, look, I have a supply chain planner because without the actual enterprise context about what is happening and how you do things, that is super important. Then you have to say like, hey, look, how do I make sure I run it with the right permissions and with the right, as you go from sort of concept approval, which is sort of like where you'd say 1 and 2 are, into production, you really want to think about how do I make sure that this has access to the right production data? How do I make sure it has the right access control, right? And an agent, when it starts acting like this, is not the user. Now, we used to sort of like Copilot and Cowork and others running on your desktop, and they look like, hey, look, they're running as you, which is fine, and they can access whatever you can access. But real business processes have systems that you can't access directly, but they can access only as a application. So think about what the identity of the agent is, what permissions does it have, what can it do on your behalf versus what it can do by itself, are important problems to solve. Then you have to run runtime. We have to deploy it on runtime. And this is where a lot of the work that Brad talked about is super important, because you need to actually run this agent in a way that's it's scalable, it is mission critical. Again, we are no longer talking about sort of like optional productivity scenarios, but we're talking about like the core of how you run your business. You need to make sure that you have HADR. You need to make sure that you have the right logging and the right observability. So you want to make sure, and right mitigation. So that's what an enterprise runtime does. And sort of when you run that, then you want to be able to say, often depending on where the problems are, you may not want to run it just in the cloud. Cloud is obviously a great first place to go, but often these scenarios, like for instance, what we just talked about in the Chevron case, those things are better done actually in the edge at the site. And so they're thinking about how do I sort of get a rack of Dell machines, for instance, to build that out and run those. So that sort of where you run actually becomes an important aspect, as it's sort of looking at a lot of data that is actually that needs to deal with. You want to manage costs. And then once you have all these things running, you want to manage it end to end over time. And so you want to think about like what happens when I do version control? What happens when the agent gets smarter? How do I make sure that the agent gets the feedback that it needs and then that it improves? So you're going on the spectrum, and obviously, when you do that, you get this one up and running. You're constantly monitoring that and improving it, and then you start the next one. And so this is in many ways similar to what happened with ML ops, but here we are now talking about another set of things, because here we are looking at actions and APIs and not just sort of pure data to actually manage the outcome. Let's go to the next slide. So we wanted to call out sort of DataRobot obviously does this. This is why we are sort of having this webinar. We have done this with many customers, and we have learned sort of how customers are doing. Again, this is a early stage for everyone, both for our customers and us, in terms of like really getting into the heart of the business outcomes and figuring out what to do. And to deliver that, we have a great platform that solves a lot of the problems that we talked about in that slide. But really sort of working closely with our partners like Dell and NVIDIA, we partner with our customers to actually say, what is the hard problem that you have that you want to agentify, and how do we sort of build that out? And sort of called out with our, the third time around, we're a MQ leader, and we are working with some very, the only AI pure play company that is in that quadrant. So definitely proud of that, and sort of gives you a sense for the credibility we have with customers to deliver these agents. Go to the next slide, please. I'm not going to read every one of these things, but I think there's obviously a little bit of a pat in the back for us. But sort of key takeaways from the MQ. The thing we are sort of really focused on is, I think, best done in sort of what Gartner says in the first bullet, which is really specialize in high complexity agentic workflows. So I think we are all seeing what chatbots can do and single task things can do. I think there is a role for those things, but as much as we have done those things the last 2 to 3 years, there's still this big thing around like, hey, look, why are we not getting big ROI? And it's not like you might be getting ROI. It's that it's hard to measure when you're looking at something soft like productivity, or like, I'm doing things a little bit faster. You can be like, great, I wrote the email, 15% faster. I finished the process 15% faster. Some of them can be quantified. Many of them cannot be quantified. And but you can get delight, for instance, but like, that's not a hard ROI. So I think people are really looking for hard ROI that they can say, why am I spending hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars on generative AI and these LLMs? And I think it's really useful to think through what are the hard business workflows that your company depends on, and how can we reinvent them so you can really put a hard number on that. So that's a super important concept that we have landed, and we want to sort of share with you. Let's see. I think the second one obviously is architecture flexibility. This is where a lot of our partnership with Dell comes in. We see a huge amount of money being spent outside the hyperscalers on AI, and they're looking at cost, they're looking at sovereignty, they're looking at making sure that they're not enriching the model providers with their own business processes and data. And so being able to run the model depending on the use case where you want it is a super important piece, and sort of being able to run it inside your on-prem environment or in your sovereign cloud is important, and that is something we are really focused on supporting and driving. We built a platform with NVIDIA. A lot of the work that we talked about has both NVIDIA components and open source and DataRobot components. But things like co-op, which are like leaders in utilizing GPUs for solving really hard problems, are built into the system. And then we also work not just as a platform provider, but we work as a team that can actually help deliver the agents as well. We often are very deeply partnered with customers to understand the change management, understand how to build the agent with them, and we're using that to both get to the business outcome for the customer, but also for us to learn what needs to happen in an agent. That is the important part. There's thousands of companies all saying they're doing agent platforms. What we are focused on is like sort of figuring out what really works in the customer by having our forward deployed engineers work with the customer to actually do the deployment and take the risk out, and then taking those lessons and updating the platform behind it to actually have this virtuous cycle. Let's go to the next slide. So the best way to get started really is to sort of have an agent build clinic, and this is sort of what we've seen. Seeing agents at work can be eye-opening, and you need to be able to see what is possible. We have seen what is possible as a consumer with like the likes of ChatGPT. We've seen it what's likely with coding, with sort of likes of Cloud Code. But really, have you seen an agent that does supply chain planning? Have you seen an agent that does logistics planning? Have you seen an agent that does, operational safety? And those are much more sort of like unique to your company. And so what we're really doing is working with you to actually in this clinic to actually think about the art of the possible and how do we very quickly build that out. And so so we have our own agent built into the platform that actually can help you with your once you have a business outcome that you want to look at. How do you sort of build an agent, test it out, and then get a quick view of it? And that's an implementation that you can sort of keep and then sort of build from it. So I think it's a super important idea that we've seen where getting your hands dirty with your use case and getting a real thing up and running can really open up your eyes in terms of what is possible with agents. And so that's what we call the Agent Build Clinic. So with that, let's go to the last slide. Brad, I'll let you close this out.
Awesome. So what we wanted to make sure everybody understood is really the benefit of DataRobot on Dell AI Factory. When you combine the two together, what you really get is a full stack experience from an AI factory perspective with NVIDIA. And we've made it easy to make sure that DataRobot has a very simplified deployment and management experience. This is actually delivered through the Dell Automation platform. If you're curious about that, you can go to automation.dell.com/catalog and learn more about that there. You can also click on this link, by the way, which will take you there. On top of that, what we've found is by the combination of our Dell AI Factory, including our Dell AI Data Platform, we actually are able to help customers make sure that they have speed to deployment, really deploy into the sovereign AI types of environments with air-gapped options is extremely huge for a lot of our customers to build their agents and handle their data. But the real notion is that DataRobot is now part of our ecosystem program, where we bring together other LLM providers and tooling that helps make sure that DataRobot and AI Factory with NVIDIA together are helping you for your entire enterprise set of outcomes you're looking to achieve. So we really wanted to pull these together and make sure you saw the better together side. I do know that we have a few questions, so I think we're going to jump into maybe some questions right now. I'll
Yes.
actually answer one of them live if you want, Vika.
Yeah, please. We'll stop sharing the screen. Everyone can see your faces. All right, so let's take a look at questions we have from the audience. The first one for Brad is how do you evaluate? Actually, I'm sorry, this one is for you. ML can be implemented using traditional data models in DataRobot. Why do we apply LLM for ML? I'm trying to find a use case for it. LLM, as you said, can help us identify the best fit ML model.
Yeah, maybe I can take that one. So I'd say, we're not arguing that you should use LLMs for doing traditional predictive model. In fact, what we're saying is the LLM will complement the traditional ML model to actually solve more of the broader business use case, right? As I said in one of the first few slides, like predictive models are great at saying, hey, look, here is some data, and here's the prediction for that item. It's a single prediction, and you can have a batch prediction, etc. But you're really doing, but what are you doing with the prediction is something else, the rest of the business process. And so what LLMs can help you do is to call the prediction model when appropriate, get the prediction, and then do something with it. Things like, it can do a what if scenario, right? If you say, hey, look, what happens if I'm doing, again, I'm using logistics because it's sort of top of mind for a lot of people. We can say, hey, look, what happens if the Strait of Hormuz is closed for another 30 days? What is my effect, right? And so then again, obviously, you can then call the model to actually get the predictions in terms of forecasting. But what you're doing is you're not asking the model directly, you're not looking at a dashboard. You're actually having this interactive conversation with your planning agent, right? So think of, and that's what we call ourselves a agent workforce platform. There's going to be these new agents that are going to be part of the workforce that you're going to be talking to and working with to get these things done. And that's really what we are arguing for. Now, that is different than I think the other question that I think Brad would like to answer, which is it doesn't mean predictive models are only going to be historically like XGBoost and things like that. There's an increasing move to having more transformer-based models. And so I think the question on TPFN is a good one. And then a series of models that are coming out that can actually deal with tabular data like we're seeing with unstructured data. So that is a different question, and we'll answer that in the second one. But the point of my exercise is like the use cases are really almost any hard problem that you want to do, any hard business outcome you're trying to do. If you start saying, what if I ask the agent to do it instead? And then how do I augment the agent with all the data and the context and the people and the subject expertise that to make that successful? That's kind of what we're arguing for.
Thanks, Venki. We have a couple other questions from the audience coming up. One is, how do you evaluate the value path to either embed existing recommender systems trained on the company data as tools for an agent versus using pre-trained models of agents like Databricks directly?
Yeah, I'll take a shot at this and Venki might be able to augment it. But my view on this is that if you already have something that's kind of an existing expert system or recommender system in the background, you definitely should start with that as your first set of tools, especially if it's been business tested, business hardened from a logic perspective and data training. For you to go replicate that and rewrite that in like an earlier pilot or POC state probably would not make sense. If you can get the agent to a good state while using that existing system, then you're at least validating the logic of the agent as well as kind of the construct of how that operating model is going to work with the agent. And then if you want, you can shift over towards more of the model side of it from some of these other systems that you mentioned. But that then takes time to get them up to the same kind of fighting weight as you actually had the original recommender system. So if you're thinking of time to value of the actual outcome that you're driving, always use existing tools and systems in place as much as you can to get off the ground. I would not try replacing everything out of the gate. It's a lot of work with a lot of implications that'll cause issues down the road.
Yeah, maybe I can add a little color as well. It is the tab PFN is an example from prior labs. I think that's running on Databricks. It can run in any system, so it can run on DataRobot as well. So I think it's just a model type, and that we can sort of work through it. I think the question of like, should you use this model or something else is the age-old question that we've always had, which is like, when you do your evaluation, is it better for your use case, right? And so in automated machine learning, we look at multiple different kinds of model architectures to actually figure out what's right. We should do that with this as well. And so now I'd say these techniques are early. And so to Brad's point, they are more immature and they have different levels of constraints, technical constraints. And so what I would say is like, to get the business use case, if you're happy with the predictive model right now, go agentic. And then you can sort of replace this at any time if you feel like that technology is better than the current technology. But what we have seen so far is none of these new things are panaceas. Again, we tend, again, in this hype wave that we have around AI, every time a new technology comes out, we're like, oh my God, it's going to solve all old problems. Like, it turns out it doesn't, right? What it does is it moves the technology forward, and certainly we should evaluate that. But it's not a either or. It's really have to say, look, let's look at it. If it's good enough for my use case, definitely use it. And there's also a cost implication as well, which is like you have to look at the total cost of ownership. A lot of these models tend to be more expensive because they use GPUs, they use bigger things, but they also make benefits on the other side, like removing the need to pre-train and manage the MLOps lifecycle. So there are benefits to it. So I think you want to look at that with your eyes wide open before you choose that. But it is just another component. And the way you build these things is these agents, the predictive models, etc., they become MCP servers. So whether there's a Tab PFN powered MCP server or an XGBoost powered MCP server, the agent doesn't know any different. All it's doing is asking questions and getting answers back. And so you can actually have your cake and eat it too, which is like you can be agentic, sort of make the workflow better, but then you can also change in individual components and make them better as you see fit.
Thanks, Venki. And kind of going off of that, can we trust agents on taking data governance decisions?
It's a super broad question. I would say
That's all you.
For all these kind of questions, I would say the answer is no first. But then I'll say the second answer is it depends, right? Because I think, like, again, what we've seen is that this is a rapid evolving and maturing space. So anything that sounds like magic is probably magic. And so if you're like, does it solve all problems? No, it does not solve all problems. But there are problems it can solve that are really useful. So I think as you think about data governance, for instance, like, whether it's anomaly detection or analysis, there are a number of things you can do with them. But I think it's a more specific, I think the idea is to get a lot more specific on what is the problem you think is going to solve, and we can give you some ideas on whether the current state of the art supports it or not. And sometimes I actually don't know. We can follow up as well.
Okay, great. So we'll pivot a little bit. We have another question saying cloud first has been the dominant AI deployment model across Latin America, but we're now seeing a clear shift towards sovereign and on-prem AI infrastructure. How do you envision the role of AI factories in Latin America over the next 5 years? And what do you think will be the key drivers accelerating that transition?
Yep, I'll jump in
That is
there.
all you.
So,
Yes.
yep, I got it. So, Latin America definitely is an up and coming market for us that we're seeing out there. Obviously, the US and North America led and EMEA kind of started catching up. But in Latin America, what we're starting to see now is two things. We're seeing the reliance on having sovereign AI discussions all over the place. And when you jump into a sovereign AI conversation, it really ties back to the connections you have back to the vendors, back to politics and governments, back to data sources. All of that stuff ties in. And we're seeing a lot of the Latin American countries right now starting to put out and express their opinions as well as policies that are now starting to align to those conversations. Because of that, that is driving more of an on-prem AI factory view of the world. So we are seeing that market very much pick up. Where the problem comes in that everybody around the world is dealing with right now is when you contemplate doing more of an AI factory on premises or in a colo, you run into the power and cooling conversations. And that's usually the number one thing that I've seen in Latin America right now that's kind of can you handle some of the requirements that you are requesting when deploying an AI factory? So that usually pops in early into the conversation.
Yeah, I think LATAM is definitely growing. In fact, I'm going to Brazil in 3 weeks to actually work with the Dell team
Yep.
on our sovereign story. So I'm looking forward to that. Uh, I think that I just wanted to sort of put that in. Vika, do you have any more questions?
Yes, this is actually going to be our last question, just looking at the time. So Venki, this one is for you. If the Chinese have made significant advances in LLMs and reduced costs, how will that impact your economics for providing LLMs for agentic AI? And will there be security concerns using Chinese models?
Great. I'll answer, but I'm sure Brad will want to get the last word in. So I'd say that the Chinese models I think are amazing. They are really changing sort of and challenging sort of our view of how things, the cost and uh, the cost capability curve. They're sort of moving that dramatically. So I think it's good for the industry as a whole. I think that's super important. I think what we've seen with customers is that there are two ways to approach it. One is if you're looking at a Chinese API that's hosted out of China, they might have explicit policies around what terms of service that you can or cannot use. But that is why there's a huge amount of the focus of a lot of the Chinese models is open weights and open and being open, and so that allows companies to inspect. And there are a whole set of companies who are doing it. NVIDIA looks at those models and they make them enterprise ready with this what they call NIMs, NIM inference microservices. They're containers that are fully supported by NVIDIA, and they've looked at all the security concerns and make sure that that's available. So I would say there's not a single pat answer that says Chinese models equal security concerns. I think it's really around terms of service and what your company can handle and what your company's policies are. And so, we have seen, Kimike, DeepSeek in broad use. Lots of companies are using it. And they also provide this massively valuable high capability models that can run on-prem. So you don't have, when you're looking at the sovereign question, open weights are going to be a critical part of your solution. It's not the only part. I think people often have to do some amount of frontier model calling, so through routers and such. But there are the foundation of these things will be open weight models, and the Chinese companies have a huge number of models that are very capable. So I definitely have them in the mix and not outright sort of say they're not capable of being used in enterprise in Americas or anywhere else. Brad,
Yeah,
I'm sure.
I want to
Yeah.
add a little bit to that. So, from a Dell perspective, we very much are seeing the open weight side of it, as well as the Chinese models take off in conversation, not just because Kimi K3 came out and like basically opened everybody's eyes to, oh my God, like you're basically fighting at a frontier model weight perspective. But we're seeing real demand out there for these types of models that are frontier grade open weight models at this point. And right now, that is where China's kind of leading with DeepSeek and Quen and some of those things coming out. Kimi K3, obviously the newest one. So what you're going to see from us is we're going to try to make sure that everybody has access to all of those. If you go into Hugging Face, you'll find the Dell Enterprise Hub in Hugging Face, which is like dell.huggingface.com. And when you go there, we're making sure that we've vetted and looked at the Chinese models on top of Dell AI Factory and published those with some optimizations around them. So we very much believe from Michael Dell down that the open weight ecosystem, it has a major, huge place in the industry. As well, Chinese models have to be vetted, but we do believe they will have a role as well in a lot of businesses if they are willing to do their own vetting of the models.
Thanks, Brad. I know we're right at time, but we have one more question I want to try to squeeze in that just came in. Can you talk about how you're helping companies improve data quality and data prep capabilities? How Dell and DataRobot collaborate on that, and how DataRobot leveraged the acquisition of Data in that matter?
Yeah, I think I'll go first. And I know Brad has something to say about data prep as well, so we'll sort of speak to that. So, the way DataRobot has been focused on is how to get the data ready for your AI, right? So we always focused on how to make sure data is ready for predictive modeling, training, retraining, etc. So, we did buy a company called Paxata so many years ago. We have integrated a lot of those things in pipelines and feature engineering, etc., is built into the platform. And so we are a complete platform for building your AI applications. In the last 2 years, we've added a number of unstructured data processing to actually get AI ready for the new world. And so that is things like how do you build a RAG pipeline? How do you build embeddings? How do you provide context and memory? These are all sort of data related concerns for an AI application. And so that we've sort of built that, and our platform is a full featured platform that allows you to get the data you need to make those things happen. But we are an AI pure play, so we are not actually a data platform. So we allow you to access the data and clean the data, make it work for your agentic use case. And for the rest of it, so in terms of the data platform as a whole, we depend on our partners. In the cloud could be things like Databricks and Snowflake. But I want to hand it over to Brad to talk about Dell's own data platform.
Yeah, so we have two views. We obviously have the ecosystem side of it that DataRobot, Venki, and team are part of as an example, but we do have the AI data platform from Dell that actually is kind of a abstraction sitting on top of a lot of people's data and storage at this point. And the goal there is to help people from the ingest all the way through all the pipeline building and workflow development, as well as the vector search, all the way through connecting it to your targets, which is all the agents and models and everything else. So we do have an opinionated view of that tied to an AI data platform that if people are interested, reach out. We can definitely dig into that more with you.
All right, thank you. We still have a few more questions we won't have time to get to today, but we'll follow up with everyone. So thank you so much for joining. Brad, Venki, thank you for everything you shared today, for your insights. And the webinar will be available on demand if you'd like to rewatch or share with anyone. So thank you and have a good day, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good day.